All right, I've got to post the link up because I haven't done that yet.
Thanks, Paul. Good. I see you too. Don's coming. Erin's coming. I told them it's both at 3, so they'll probably be here in the next 5 minutes.
Hello.
Hey, Laura.
I have been wearing the opposite of comfortable stuff all day long today. It's so weird not being in pajamas.
I highly recommend getting a Star Trek engineering shirt that definitely doubles as a pajama top. Like the hardest thing I have to worry about is that it's kind of warm, but you know.
All right, the link has been sent to everybody.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
So I'm going to, once everyone gets in, you guys get started, I'm going to turn myself off video-wise and sound-wise. There will be questions over in the chat.
I've already got it up. I've got it up in the lower corner, so I see Paul's message to me from a couple of minutes ago. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. So we had some people that really wanted to make sure they could ask you guys some questions. So I'm just going to stay quiet in the background unless something comes up and you guys need me. All right.
That sounds great. That sounds great.
And then we're shooting for, because there's a panel right after this I have to set up for. So 5:45 is about where we're shooting for.
That's what you told me earlier. I'm all ready for it.
But that doesn't mean that you guys can't jump over to Discord afterwards and continue on the conversation. There's a bunch of voice chats set up. So only if you guys want to. I don't want anyone to feel like they have to. But just letting everyone know there's social stuff abounding here. Except
that's
no touching.
Awesome. That's awesome. That's right. The distance is already built in. Yeah.
I know. I realized when Laura was putting on my elf ears how weird it's going to be in the next year when things do change to be that close to so many people, something we've taken for granted for so long, you know?
Oh, I'm going to hug everybody. As soon as I'm allowed to, I'm going to hug everybody, you know, after getting consent. But after that, like one step is reached, absolutely everyone gets a hug.
All right, Laura's logging in so she can watch me from 2 different angles right now.
That's fantastic. I like that when your panel first appeared and I saw all the liquor bottles, I was like, I've been in that room before. Ooh, I think we have Dr. Don Lincoln joining us in process right now. That's very exciting. He's going to be jealous that he's not wearing elf ears, or maybe he is wearing elf ears and he won't be jealous.
I'm never jealous.
It's not going to save it. There's you guys are viewing into the con committee room. Hello, Don.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Hi, Dr. Don. Good to meet you in person, kind of.
Yes, kind of, for the first time.
Yeah. We've only been like text buddies, and now,
it's the real thing.
The real deal is happening.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask, have you had a chance to watch through Star Trek Picard in its entirety?
I watched 8.5 episodes and read the blurb for the last 1.5.
Okay. I will say that the finale is very satisfying,
Mm-hmm.
and there will be spoilers in the panel.
That's okay. I did read it up, so I know what's going to happen.
Okay. It's worth watching anyway. I'm thinking about watching it again real soon because I really enjoyed it. I thought that there were a few episodes that lagged a little bit, but the overall message I thought was a great one, and it hit all the boxes for me that I wanted Star Trek Discovery to hit when that first came out. So to have Picard just nail it so hard and do so well, I was like, you know, this is really that mix of technology and hope and those ethical dilemmas where sometimes you have to do the hard thing and trust people who maybe you're not 100% confident in, but you have to give them the opportunity. I really like that style of managerialness in my life where people say, you know what, you're a pro and I trust you to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. Hey, Dr. Erin.
What?
That's right. I see you got your pips on, Captain. I'm just down here in engineering in the original series.
Awesome.
To anyone, I see that I am the only panelist here wearing my elf ears. I would like to promote everyone that these are really great ears, and I bought them from Aradani Studios, and I sent them like a flesh tone of my skin, and they painted it and matched it for me. It looks super good. It's super comfortable. I can wear these all day. And if you want this explicit model, this is on their site as Space Elf Ears.
Awesome.
So if you want your own Vulcan Romulan, clearly I must be a half because I'm way too animated to be a Vulcan. I highly recommend this product. And thank you for hosting us.
So I'm going to turn myself off, but I'll still be here in case something comes up, and have fun. Thank you so much.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. So we're all doctors. Is it okay with everyone if we go through this panel on first name basis?
Of course.
Works for me.
So we've got Dr. Don Lincoln of Fermilab. We've got Erin, Dr. Erin MacDonald, advisor to the stars, expert on Star Trek, PhD in black holes and gravitational wave physics. And you've got me, I'm Ethan Siegel, PhD in theoretical cosmology, former professor, professional full-time science communicator now. All Star Trek fans, hopefully all Star Trek Picard fans. And for those of you listening, tuned in, there will be spoilers. So I'm going to keep a chat window open in the corner. If you have questions, comments, things you want to know for me, Erin, Don, or all of us, leave them there and we'll start looking at it. So before we dive into this, Star Trek Picard, first thoughts. I want to hear it straight from you, what you thought about it. We are going to get into the science pretty fast, but as a series, as a show, what did you think?
I'll jump in. I had nothing to do with season 1. I was brought on to Star Trek after they had already wrapped. So I was watching it along with everyone else. And it was a new story. For me, it's so hard because you just feed me Star Trek and I'll watch Star Trek. And, for me, I enjoy Next Gen and I like the characters, but Janeway's my captain, represent, and Deep Space Nine is my favorite series. And for me, honestly, I felt like it was more of a sequel to Voyager than it was necessarily TNG, in the way that, they were dealing with the aftermath and the Borg and having 7 of 9 and all of that stuff. I was, as a Voyager fan, satisfied with those storylines. Overall, 2 thumbs up. I really thoroughly enjoyed Seven and Hugh. I thought they were just gems to see again.
That's great. How about you, Don?
I liked it. I like Next Gen a lot. This particular show was much more about sort of character development and ethics and less about the adventure, I think. And so it was different than a lot of Star Trek. I mean, I absolutely love Star Trek. I'll watch, as you said, anything that's Star Trek. It's incredible. But it was a different turn because it was, less about exploring space and so forth. And it was very heavily about ethics. And so that was interesting.
Yeah. I agree with that. And I think certainly the stories that they were dealing with is something we've seen in science fiction a lot outside of Star Trek that sure. I think Star Trek has not necessarily gone into as much, but without getting too much into it, it was a very familiar storyline for me because I love the Mass Effect video game series, and there's a lot of parallels between the plot of Picard and Mass Effect. But yeah, that's a good insight.
Fantastic. For me, I agree with both of you. The tie-in to Voyager was very strong. I like the new arc they gave to the 7 of 9 character. I really like the moment. Again, spoilers, everyone. So, mute if you don't want them. I really love the brief moment where she plugged her mind into the Borg cube as the queen.
Yeah.
And she got to basically be like the hive mind, the queen bee of all of those little Borg drones, even though it was brief enough that they all got thrown out the airlock. Like I said, spoilers, you know, it happened real fast, and it was a bit of a disappointment when it happened because I wanted to see that. But on the other hand, like that was really the first moment I saw where I was like, oh wow, like what an intersection of Star Trek and this whole like world that they've built, this whole universe that they've built, and this cusp where we are right now in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of hooking up humanity into this collective thing. I've always thought about the Borg as like, since I'll say not always, but maybe for the past dozen years or so, I've thought of being part of the Borg collective. What is this like? I sort of imagine it being a version of Twitter that you can't opt out of, where you see everyone's tweets all the time. And the ones, you don't like this, Erin. You don't like
hard
this.
Pass on that.
Hard pass, yeah. I don't think I would be someone, I would try very hard to opt out, but as we've seen with the Borg over and over, you don't really get to opt out. You get assimilated and you become part of the collective. The first thing that wasn't Star Trek that made me think of was, I don't know how many of you have seen the anime Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, but that is one of my favorite animes of all time. It's one of my favorite Japanese manga anime series. The voice acting is great in the English version. But one of the things that happen is there are these homunculi, there are these artificial, you know, human shelled power beings that they've created that are the villains in the story. And what they are is they are an amalgamation of a whole bunch, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of human souls brought together under this one thing. And it's just this cacophony of screaming in there. And yet we find humans who can maintain their individuality among that, who can listen to the voices and not be subsumed or overwhelmed by them. And I think that that was something that the voice of Hugh brought up from when that character was first introduced in Next Generation. And of course, he played major roles in someone else's favorite series. But I can't, you know, for me, I thought about that and I was like, wow, what must it be like when you have been a cog in this machine for what felt like an eternity in hell, and now you're put in charge, you're at the helm of it, you get that power. What does it do to you? And it again brought up that ethical dilemma of like, does power corrupt people, or does power just intensify whatever personality and personality traits you bring to it? And most of the people who seek that powerful position just are corrupt to begin with.
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, you know, what does it say? Power corrupts, and absolute power is actually kind of neat. You know, so I could easily imagine that you know, there's a lot of the case where people want power, strive for it, but even the people who get it sort of by accident, you know, I think it could be very seductive, and you know, even a mild-mannered person might like the fact that they can make their wishes happen just by whim, and you know. Yeah, I bet you could really learn to like it.
Yeah, one of the things I love about Picard in particular, the character Picard, is there are often these temptation situations very similar to that have shown up in the movies, that have shown up in the Next Generation series, and that have shown up in other series where Picard has made an appearance. And I've always thought, you know, when I was young, I didn't understand Picard. When I was a teenager and Next Gen was first airing, I was like, who is this old fuddy-duddy who's like, you know, not willing to go into action, not doing the brave thing, not doing the... And then I realized as I got older, and it didn't take that long, I was like, oh, well, that's what wisdom is, as opposed to acting rashly. And that's why Picard is a much better captain than Riker would have been, because Riker, you know, Riker, who was my favorite when I was a teenager, is actually like, is kind of a problematic character. Like I like him a lot less. Sorry, Frakes fans and Riker fans, of which Frakes is one. I actually think Riker's like a teenager's version of what a 40-year-old man should be. And now as a 40-something-year-old man, I'm like, no, you be like Picard. Do the wise thing, do the thoughtful, do the circumspect thing. And I actually love the moment in the series where Picard and Riker and Troy are all together with Soji, with the I want to call her the synthetic life form, Soji. And she says something and Picard is like, oh, you just don't get it. Like, it's like this. And, you know, ha, ha, ha. And Riker's also like, yes, ha, ha, ha. Like, as we'll see. And she goes off all upset. And Troy comes in and Troy is like, so here's what I want you two to think about. Here is her. Here is the experience she's had with her whole life. Here's what she must be feeling. What would you be feeling if this was your entire life? And what she was basically doing was giving a lesson in empathy to someone like example, powerful white man in a position of power who's had lots of breaks go their way in the form of both Picard and Riker. Versus what is this young person who's been alive for 3 years, learns the rest of her stuff is false memories. Everyone that she's loved or trusted has betrayed her for their own ends and treated her like a pawn. What is she supposed to feel? How is she supposed to trust you? Why is she supposed to know, oh, this time is different. This time, this is how we think the world is supposed to work. But I've never had even a taste of that world. I thought that was a brilliant way to basically explain what I feel of is the driving force behind Me Too to people who've never been on the receiving end of that kind of bad treatment.
It's an interesting take. Yeah. I mean, I thought that their chemistry was great. I loved seeing probably my favorite part, the part where I got most emotional over the entire series was when Riker showed up as the captain.
Oh, when he shows up as the admiral, you know, I'm on active reserve, so I'm going to come in with 3,000 ships, because who doesn't want to see a paranoid Romulan fleet meet the immovable object?
Right,
you know?
right.
Yeah.
I was a fan of that. One of the things that came up actually in that, because that was a final episode thing. So again, spoilers, everyone.
I figure if people are here,
and listening to us and haven't seen Picard yet, you know they're just going to leave and be like, okay, now I have to watch this series. I will say, if you wanna take the fast version through Picard, I'll say watch the first episode. Assume, okay, we're having a get the band back together moment where we're gonna assemble a crew and get on a ship, and then pick it up in episode 4, because that's when the Star Trek actually starts. Episodes 2 and 3 were, I don't know, I felt like those could have been summed up in 5 minutes instead of spending 2 episodes on them. But the rest of the series is great and totally worth it. And maybe if I rewatch it, which I'm planning on doing, I'll see like, oh no, actually 2 and 3 fills in some of the gaps. The only other complaint I have was about the audio engineering of the show, because it felt like they layered the music over the voices, and I found myself making it louder and making it softer and making it louder and making it softer just to try and make out what people were saying. And then I realized, you know, if they're covering over the dialogue with music, it probably doesn't matter. Just enjoy the ride.
Right.
But one of the things I loved in that last episode was they brought back an old maneuver from the Next Generation and made astounding use of it before the Federation fleet showed up, and that's the Picard Maneuver. So very briefly, the idea of the Picard Maneuver is what you're going to do is you're going to use a very small amount of warp drive power to make a jump, a faster than light jump that isn't very far away. And faster than light travel is one of my favorite devices, because if you could actually travel faster than light, it would mess up your idea of cause and effect, because what cause and effect is you think, okay, I'm going to do this action and then you're going to receive the action a time later. But here's the thing, if you know, we're gonna use a very dumb example here. If Erin decided like to punch me through the computer, like conventionally, I'd see the fist coming at me, then I'd get hit by the fist if I couldn't move out of the way fast enough. But if she punched faster than light, those photons coming from her fist are moving slower than the fist itself. So as it comes towards me, the photons are actually further and further behind. So the first thing I would experience is getting punched in the face, and then I would see her fist moving away from me, right, because it's moving faster than light. And what they use the Picard maneuver for is they make a whole bunch of very rapid jumps across small distances to basically make it look like there are multiple images of this ship, sort of like our eyes have a certain refresh rate and the television has a certain refresh rate, or whatever computer you use. Well, apparently all of the sensors will too, and they'll detect ship, maybe up to thousands of ships if they're there. And I thought, what a brilliant use of the Picard maneuver. For those of you who, again, watch the anime Assassination Classroom, this is what Koro Sensei does. And I can see from the panelists, look, let's never make that analogy again. All right.
Got a lot of anime to get through, man.
Yeah. Look, we're all our own unique kind of nerdy.
But cause and effect, I think the analogy I use for causality and how to describe how that works and why going faster than light takes you out of that realm. I use this analogy of like, you can't, it has to do with light cones, right? And so if you had some elaborate setup where you had dominoes in this opaque tube, right? And I went to go press one, some time passed and the last one fell out. You couldn't see them falling. You didn't know that they fell. You could still reasonably assume that enough time had passed that the last one was caused by me touching it. Whereas if I go to touch it and the last domino falls, then there's no way I caused that to happen because the length of time required for that hasn't passed yet. And so that's why faster than light travel breaks all ideas of causality. And I mean, the Picard maneuver is great for me. It's interesting you brought that up because that was in the midst of them also having a magic wand that they could do anything if they thought about it hard enough. And, so I wasn't necessarily paying too much attention to their description of using the Picard maneuver because I was too distracted by their magic wand tool.
No, and that's fair too. I mean, you promised me that you wanted to talk about space orchids, and like that to me, that was a moment where I was like, you know, we don't think we have anything like that on Earth as far as a biological organism goes, but how cool would that be if we could bioengineer, or if nature just brought us a flowering plant shield thing that could go up into space? I would be a big fan of that one. I see there's a question in the chat window of how do you stop quickly in the Picard maneuver? And that's a difficult question, because when you're talking about faster than light travel, you don't have those same conventional rules. If you want to say like, oh, something's going to move faster than light in the theory of relativity, how can I make that happen? The answer is, strangely, oh, I can just give the thing that's moving an imaginary mass, and that'll do it. I can just make its mass multiplied by the square root of -1, and then all the math works out. What's weird is if you slow down, if you decrease your kinetic energy as a tachyon, you actually wind up moving faster. So as you add more and more and more energy in a real mass thing, a positive mass thing, you find that you asymptote towards the speed of light, that no matter how much energy you put into it, you'll never reach the speed of light. There's that hard barrier. Well, for a tachyon, there's that same hard barrier, but it comes from the other end. So if you want to go slower, you need to pump more and more energy in. And if you take energy out of your tachyon, it actually approaches infinite speed. Which is messed up. So if you wanted to stop in the Picard maneuver, you'd have to find a way to turn your imaginary mass back into real mass. Or you'd have to invent a plot device, which will allow you to magically stop, which would again stop you from acting tachyonic at that time.
But in Star Trek, it's a warp drive, so they're compressing space and time.
Yeah.
And so isn't the case there, it's not really a tachyon thing, it's they're actually shrinking space in front of the Enterprise or any starship. And so in order to quickly stop, they have to stop the warping of space. And of course, this is all, pretend science, so it's hard to know, but it's however fast they can collapse the warp bubble would be the thing that would cause it to stop quickly.
Right. And the whole idea of the Picard maneuver is he did it because he only had enough material to do a tiny warp jump. Mm-hmm. And the way he did the jump was backwards faster than light. It was like a forwards backwards jump so that the ship appeared closer, but was farther. And then, they were like, oh no, there's this close ship here. But really what's happening is a shot is coming from behind it. And then the ship's not really there anymore because it's just the after image. And that was the original Picard maneuver from The Next Generation. I like the application of bringing it up, but you're absolutely right, because what Star Trek's warp drive does is it bends or folds space. So if you want to go from point A to point B and you're like, oh no, these are, I'm making up numbers, 40 light years away. I think I use that one because that's the distance to the TRAPPIST-1 system that I want to know, that I want to go to. So 40 light years away, but if I compress the space in front of me at the expense of expanding or rarefying the space behind me, then maybe I can only make this a 6 light month journey. So I could go travel through this space pretty quickly, get 40 light years in 6 months, check it out, come back, and then I'm a year older and everyone back on Earth is also only a year older. So I don't have to worry about the fact that if I was going close to the speed of light, I'd make the 40 light year journey, I'd make the 40 light year journey back, I'd come back with this awesome knowledge, and everyone who's a 1-year-old baby is 82 years old now. So, if you want the answer in your lifetime, you want the warp drive, which is great. So I imagine maybe the Picard maneuver is folding space just a little bit, maybe even just like folding it like you'd fold a...
So it's more
a little sheet of paper and just poke your way through to a discontinuous point.
It's that, and that's where I think that they've conflated the explanation of the Picard maneuver as being something to do with warp, because as Don said, that it's this compression and expansion of space-time in front and behind, but the Picard maneuver isn't really the warp drive at all. It's that they're doing a faster than light jump, which we haven't really seen in Star Trek necessarily at all, but is common in Battlestar Galactica or Dark Matter, where their FTL drives are, as you described it, folding 2 pieces together, jumping, and then unbending them. But it requires a ton of energy to be able to do that. So it's reasonable that using it in Star Trek, they would only be able to go a short distance to do that.
Yeah, although in some ways I think it's arguable that going a long distance might actually be easier than going a short distance, because folding, it's sort of like if I took a piece of paper and I wanted to only fold it a short distance, boy, it's a lot harder to connect these 2 close points. I have to get some real gnarly stuff in there, as opposed to making a smooth, maybe we could just make this piece of paper. I've folded it a lot of times already, clearly. But maybe if I make it into a cylinder, there we go, that's cylinder-like. Maybe it's easier to have a softer curvature on a larger scale.
But that huge fold that you just made, all of that requires energy to bend it. You'd need the energy equivalent of a matter of mass that the amount of mass that would fold space-time that much, which is a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And this is like, we have black holes of all different sizes, but you'd basically need like a couple of connected black holes worth of energy at least.
Right.
Right.
All right. So that was one of my fun science things, was the Picard maneuver. What about the other big one? Then this is one that goes throughout the whole series, this idea, and this is something I think we're facing in our society, or on the cusp of facing, is this idea of synthetic life, is this idea of when does artificial intelligence actually lead to like its own unique entity? What sort of rights does it get? What sort of, you know, murder does it get if we turn it off? There was an episode in The Next Generation. It's a classic one. It's one of my all-time favorites. It's called The Measure of a Man. And what they basically did, and they had the character, that's where they introduced Bruce Maddox, who is so unceremoniously murdered early on in Picard. Bruce Maddox decides that, oh, Data is a machine. Data is a piece of technology. He's a machine. He's incredibly useful, and we should replicate it. So I want to dissect it. I want to take it apart, and then I want to figure out how to put it back together. And it's it the whole way through. And as we see, Picard doesn't see it that way. He sees Data as his crew member, as a person with the same rights that any person has, and as his friend. And all of these things come together in I'll say a 12 Angry Men style bottle episode, where they have a big courtroom argument. Very compelling television, even 30 years after it aired, where they basically put Data on trial for his humanity. And that's, I think, one of the things that picks back up again in Star Trek Picard. And maybe it's more relevant today because of how widespread artificial intelligence is, and because of how many systems human beings aren't smart enough to hold all that information in their head and synthesize it together. You kind of need machine learning to do it, although arguably you need machine learning guided by an intelligent human algorithm, an intelligent human programmed algorithm, and not just have it go teach itself what to do. But synthetic life is, if you had asked me, 20 years ago, synthetic life, what are we talking about? And I would have thought of something like, oh, maybe we could like make some synthetic type of nucleic acid molecule and it can self-replicate. And that's what synthetic life is. And now I look at the idea of synthetic life and I think, what does that even look like? And I was a little surprised in Star Trek Picard, we got much more of a Borg-like version of it. I'll say maybe even more of a Terminator-like version, where you have this fusion of living flesh and blood, very human things mixed with a machine. And I'm not talking like, oh, I have a pacemaker in my heart or I have some implanted devices. I'm like, no. Fundamentally, you're this hybrid of both. You're like this Westworld style machine. I don't know how close we are to that, but I'm both intrigued and a little bit apprehensive of the possibility of building something like that. What are your thoughts?
Well, we have to be careful, of course, because if it becomes stronger and more powerful and smarter, then, just purely evolutionarily point of view, it could outcompete us. So, there is an inherent danger in making something that has powers that you don't have. But that aside, if AI is made to be roughly equivalent to humanity and so the competition is more fair, I think it would be interesting to do. I mean, but that's the worry, is it's to be replaced by what is probably a superior organism, or at least in principle could be.
Yeah, I worry about that too. Not that it'll render us unnecessary, because I think we've seen very clearly the Earth is going to do just fine without us. Mm-hmm. Our goal as humans is to increase the success of human civilization. We don't all necessarily agree on what success looks like for human civilization, but I've always thought that if we can be knowledgeable and well and happy and can make it so that future generations have better, happier, more successful lives, however they define it, than we have, then we've moved society forward. But that also means reducing suffering, increasing knowledge, and it's possible that they'll come up with the ultimate solution of, oh, you know what would definitely reduce suffering the most? If there were no humans and it was all machines. Then there would be no suffering at all, because machines don't suffer.
Well, but I think that that's why this is the type of story that we see in science fiction all the time. And like I said, I was surprised to see it show up in Star Trek because they haven't really gone down that path before, particularly because they've spent so long making that argument that data is unique and rare and has this ability that is a challenge, like that, you know, in the Measure of a Man episode, not everyone agrees on his existence or what his role is. And so that kind of got shifted with Picard, where the type of stuff we've seen in science fiction before is going down that path of thinking like, well, what if AI gets smart enough, and if we are necessary or not, and what are those limits to it? And like that's also the plot, like I said, in Mass Effect, and kind of spoiler, what they were doing here was that there is a race of some sort of sentient race that keeps a check on artificial intelligence, you know, that comes in and shuts it down if it gets too good.
And it's kind of funny because they not only did that in Star Trek Picard, they also did the reverse. They also did the reverse of having like, okay, there's actually this race of synthetic life that if humans start messing with too much stuff and they create synthetic life, then the synthetic life overlords come in and wipe out the biological life so that the synthetic life doesn't have to deal with the extermination threat of the biological organisms. Which is, you know, like you brought it up earlier, very much reminded me of Battlestar Galactica and the war between the humans and the Cylons. But I also liked, I won't go into whether the ending in Battlestar was satisfying or not. I think we'll just get into an argument if we do that.
That's another panel.
Yeah, it's a different panel. But what I really liked about the way Star Trek Picard dealt with that is it wasn't like someone came in and made the decision. They set it up and they said, look, here are the consequences. You can do this and these events will happen and the outcome will be unknown. Or you can do this and these events will happen and the outcome will be unknown. And there was genocide in the past, and there was this other genocide in the past, and we have to decide what's the path forward. And it was very interesting to have Soji, to have the synthetic life form basically have the big red destructo button in her hand. And all those feelings of doubt and who she can't trust welling up inside her. And it's tempting. You can feel how tempting it is to just put that button and know you're going to be safe right now, that you have this threat of being destroyed, but you're going to be safe if you push that button. But there's consequences for everyone who isn't you, or everyone who isn't like you, if you do push that button. And that's the kind of ethical dilemma that I love. I was talking to Don briefly about this earlier before you showed up, Erin, and I was like, you know, I love that. I love that that's the Picard managerial style, is he's not going to micromanage you. He's going to give you the option to make the choice that you believe is best. But he's going to make it very clear that he trusts you to make that decision, even if the consequences for him and everyone else are super dire if you don't make the good decision. It was a moment worthy of President Roslin. I don't know. Do you guys have additional thoughts about that?
Well, I think the hard part for me, because it's straying away from the science discussion, but the when you talk about being in that position to make that decision and live with the consequences, I feel like they kind of stripped Picard of that at the end, which, spoiler alert, but turning him into a synthetic, I was kind of like, because the whole point of the story was that, and we just, in the stuff that I do, we just watched Cause and Effect with Data, and that's the one where they get they find Data's head in the future, or that was left in the 1800s, and it was very poignant. I wish I had watched it before I watched Picard, because that's where Data has that discussion of him finding comfort in the fact that he has immortality, that he has an end date, and they found his body, and there is a date that he dies, and he's not going to get around that. And everyone else is freaking out, and Data's really satisfied with that, and he's very happy with it. And so there was this whole discussion about like how the core of what our humanity is the knowledge of our own mortality. And once you're immortal, you remove that. And so then having it at the end to be like, so you're mortal, but you're not immortal, but we're making you mortal, but we could make you immortal if we wanted to. It was kind of a bit of a mixed message at the end.
I mean, I will say I thought it was a bit of a cop-out, and I looked at that and I was like, well, this wrapped up all nice and neat, and everyone's story had a satisfying ending, and then they said, we want a season 2. And so we brought him back, and we plot devised it there. And it was unnecessary, but I think to have the closure on Data's death and memory turned off, I think that made it feel like there actually was a big loss to be had there. And so I was glad they at least brought that around emotionally.
I think I would take a little exception on the humanity having to be mortal. I mean, we are mortal, and it's something that we have to accept so far. But, we do live longer than we used to, and there may be someday where something like, well, either we can, improve the biology that we are, or possibly transfer our self into some long-lived object, as we saw in this Picard, where Picard moved from being the biological Picard to the synthetic Picard. So when we say it's, our mortality is humanity, that's a truth, because, well, it's the way biology works. But I don't think intrinsically it has to be. I mean, if we did live forever, we would still be human. We would not worry about death, but we'd have other problems too.
Yeah, and there's always been this sort of thing about there's 2 types of immortality you have to worry about. One is the ageless kind of immortality, and one is the can't be killed kind of immortality. And I would much rather have the ageless kind, particularly as I continue to age, than the I'm going to live forever time, because I can think of like no worse eternal torture than watching all the stars burn out and just watching the universe end so mind-numbingly slowly. And just, yes, I know there's a whole universe inside us that goes on and on forever and ever infinitely, just like there is with the outward universe, but I will get bored of that at some point. It will not take 10 to the 10 to the 10 to the 10 years for that to happen.
Well, I would think a bright young lad like you, if you had that much time, would figure out a way to regenerate the universe.
I love
so
that.
Get on it.
Everyone who is like more than 10 years older than me looks at me and like, you're a young person. And every young person looks at me and they're like, hi, Dad.
Yeah, it'll be Grandpa soon enough.
It will be Grandpa soon enough. You see how the white is coming in so nice.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get there. I'll get all the way there. We did get a comment that wanted to know, what is each of our opinions on causality in actual physics? And are there any situations where it may not hold, like wormholes, event horizons, or Bell's inequality? And because I read the question, I'll go first and say, I think that causality in relativity is pretty solid. In plain old general and special relativity, causality is pretty solid because we don't, as far as we know, have tachyons and have to worry about that. Folded space, we understand based on the folding we have that things still follow geodesics, and I don't think we have to worry about it being broken. But if we go into the realm of quantum mechanics, you have this combination of things that can't all simultaneously be true. You cannot have a universe where causality holds and local realism holds and determinism holds. You can't have all of them. So it's really a question of what do you want to give up? This is why there are so many different interpretations of quantum mechanics, because there's some level of weirdness or difficulty that you can't just sweep under the rug. And if you insist on keeping causality, you can keep it, but it comes at the expense of things like determinism and local realism. So you have to say like, okay, well, the universe, lives in this imaginary space. And that's sort of given by the fact that quantum mechanics takes place in an imaginary vector space, in a complex vector space. So I'll say you can keep causality if you want, but if you do, you might have to give up something that's even worse in your philosophical mind than cause and effect.
Well, so I guess I mostly agree, but I'm going to reveal our relative prejudices, you being a theoretically minded individual and me being an experimental minded one. When we talk about tachyons and things like that, it is often common for people to try and apply Einstein's equations to that. But Einstein's equations explicitly only work for speeds lower than light. And so when people say, well, we're going to use the gamma factor, the 1/1 minus v squared over c squared and all that, and when you go faster than light, you get imaginary numbers, but that's actually assuming that those equations have any merit at all faster than light. There's really no fundamental reason. We have no experimental data. We don't know what the mathematics governing things faster than light, if that's even possible. And so I think it's hasty to take the equations that we know of and project them to a realm where they've never been tested at all. I mean, that's like a person living in the Amazon rainforest, assuming that water can get colder and colder and colder and not know that ice exists. So I'm very hesitant to say anything about things faster than light. We just have no information at all.
I really like that analogy. I think that's a good point. I guess I kind of fall between the two of you on the opinion here, just because with the general relativity background that I have, it's the understanding the limitations in the mathematics and how that holds true. But then if you take that way step further back and try not to think about anything other than just that pure theoretical, you're in the math realm at that point. So we're talking
Right.
about how these four-dimensional fabrics behave and how, if you fix one dimension, how that behaves. And so if you step all the way into that far mathematical corner and just play with the equations, you can kind of make it work. But then, I do agree with you in the sense that we have this, from an experimental standpoint, it's like we don't even know where to start when it comes to tachyons, because our entire approach to the world is a cause and effect. I mean, when we're, infants, it's about figuring out that my hand is my hand and I'm controlling that, and all of that is cause and effect. And that's how we've developed our scientific reasoning. And so when you are trying to study a object or find something that doesn't exist in that realm, that we don't even know how to start with that. Maybe a little bit easier analogy for people is not so much thinking about tachyons and cause and effect and general relativity and equations, but more thinking of like when we're searching for life on other worlds, right? We're looking for biological signatures that mimic what we know here on Earth because that's what we know. And we don't know where to start even looking for the unknown unknowns because we only have our own reference point. And I think you can carry that mindset over to tachyons, and just saying that is a realm that we don't have a reference point to even begin thinking of. I still like playing with the equations, but but with that grain of salt that we don't know what it'll look like outside of the speed of light.
Following that, though, I mean, again, as an experimentalist, and I think there's a sin that people can have is falling into the trap of loving one's equations too much.
That's fair.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
For instance, I mean, just Newtonian physics, and that's a simple thing. We don't have to get into quantum mechanics or anything like that. It says that the force changes as 1/r², and that's fine, and that works really quite well. You can do a lot of orbital mechanics, but if you're thinking about the Earth and something coming close to the Earth, that works just fantastically until you get to a radius of 4,000 miles, in which case you slam into the Earth and there's new physics. It's called, just crashing. So, and that's not part of the whole Newtonian orbital paradigm. And so, it's really tricky when people start talking about like singularities in general relativity. Well, singularities are a mathematical construct in relativity, and what it means is that you pushed your math too hard, because general relativity will break down and eventually quantum gravity will take effect. We have no idea what quantum gravity is, but I'm pretty sure that it will shield us from singularities. And so we have to be really careful when we talk about these extrema that if you really love your equations, it'll lead you to a misleading and often something a philosophically unsatisfying conclusion.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fair. And I think it's important too, because where your laws of physics break down in one instance, where you see like, ooh, these rules that I was obeying before, they no longer apply, or there's something new here, it's very unlikely that one new thing means, oh, don't worry, all the other rules are still fine. Everything's just fine. It's just I changed this one thing. Usually when there's one pathology, there's more to the solution than, we'll just flip that one switch. That's a signpost that you're going to hit something more. We do have the panel's about to come to an end. So the last thing I want to bring up was they brought up the idea in Star Trek Picard of engineering an octuple star system, where you had a planet at the center of a star system of a binary that all orbited each other for an octuple star system. And when I saw that, my first instinct was, why would you engineer a star system by moving stars across the universe instead of just finding a naturally occurring octuple system, which certainly exists, because we've already found multiple sextuple star systems, 2 7-star systems, and we've only looked at a few thousand star systems to do this. Obviously, there's going to be 8, 9, and more, depending on the orbital parameters you're allowed. Why assume that you would engineer it that way instead of just moving a planet or moving a beacon to an unusual system? It's a lot easier energy-wise to move a planet than 8 stars. Trust me on that one. You guys have thoughts on that?
Well, I just hope their diagram wasn't to scale, because that's a very gravitationally unstable system that I can guarantee they're not able to orbit each other stably by any means. They're all going to be thrown out.
But the NASA Kepler illustrations look like that too, and they are just illustrations.
Right, and I mean, because size and scales and space are really hard to wrap our minds around. Yeah. But if they engineered it, right,
I guess they could engineer to do anything, but I don't like the idea of like, hey, this thing is going to be unstable on the way that they depicted it. It looked like things were going to be unstable on like millennium timescales, and so they've got this thing there that they say is 200,000 years old, and I'm like, that's not really how instability works. But at that point you're like, okay, well, we have to have thrusters on the planet to keep it there. Oh, I see the Gestapo is here.
Oh no,
I'm just kidding. I mean, I think we might have reached our time limit for the panel. You're on mute, Mike.
Yep. Yeah. So we can keep talking. So he's not here.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hate to cut it off because everyone's
echo.
Yeah, you got to have those headphones in. They fit in the elf
have
ears.
Too many
by the way.
mouses. Too many mouses and too many. We got 4 computers back here and all that. It's a crazy convention.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for joining us here on Zoom, on YouTube, and wherever else you've been watching this. This has been a lot of fun, and it's been fun for me to panel with you, Don, and you, Erin. Thank you for joining me and being part of this impromptu con.
Well, thanks for inviting us.
And we all got the color memo, so well done,
We
everyone.
did. We did. Mike, I hope you don't have a phaser.
We're all going to die. We're all ready.
Yeah, I'm not sending you guys down to the ground. Stay where you're at right now, please. So, well, thank you guys so much. The Discord will be open all weekend if you want to swing in. You guys got some major fans in here that were asking me about all of you today. So thank you so much for coming.
All right, I'll slide into the Discord right now and share the links to my various stuff, and I appreciate it.
And also, if you guys ever need some elf ears, just get in touch with me. We'll get you a very good deal for helping us out, okay?
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.